Welcome, y'all. It's Wes with DIY Food Plot Pro. Thanks so much for joining us. Today's episode, we're going to talk about how do we take a farm from a common deer hunting farm and make it the best in the neighborhood, where all the big bucks feel comfortable and where they are spending the majority of their time in daylight during the hunting season. My name is Wes. I run the channel DIY Food Plot Pro. I have a Bachelor of Science in Agronomy degree. I farm for a living, and I have a 1,800 acre whitetail deer hunting outfitter in Western Kentucky where we cannot bait, so we rely heavily on the food plots to hunt the whitetails that we are blessed to hunt here in Western Kentucky. When I first go out onto any farm, whether that's a client's farm or whether that's picking up another farm for the whitetail outfitter, I am looking at several different things. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out on the aerial, and I want to see what is surrounding that farm. Is that woods? Is that heavy ag? What is surrounding this property, and what's the landscape like inside this property? I'm looking to fill any voids that this particular area has. That's how I go about transforming these farms from run-of-the-mill common farms to the best in the neighborhood, where we can expect the biggest majority of the big bucks to come onto this farm and stay here during daylight hours through the hunting season, where we have chances to harvest these animals. So the first thing most folks do is they look into a food plot, right? That's almost programmed into our brains. The first thing we need to do is put out a food plot. What I'm doing when I get on these farms, I have food plots on every single farm I have. So I'm a firm believer in the food plots. But what I'm looking at is more specifically, what are those food plots? So when I lease a piece of property, or when I'm going out and I'm looking at a client's piece of property, the first thing that I'm doing is I'm looking at the aerials and I'm seeing landowners' small fields that are fairly close to the land that I'm looking at. And while we can't trespass, this time of the year, as we get into early February, we can see a long way through the woods. So we can walk on our property line. A lot of times we can see those plots, see what's being raised in those plots. I'm gonna say in Western Kentucky, where I'm at, 70% of people do not food plot. They don't do anything whatsoever. They just let it be what it is, and we're gonna hunt it like it is. Roughly 30% that food plot. Out of that 30%, I'm going to say 95 to 98% are going to plant these two things. It's either going to be some sort of clover, or it's going to be some sort of cereal grain. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, but that is what the biggest majority of food plotters are going to plant. With that being said, when we go and we see, okay, our neighbor has got a food plot here, he's got one over here, he's got one on this side, that's clover or cereal grains in those plots. If we put a clover plot right here, what makes this farm any different than those farms? If all things are the same, nothing. You might have a few deer using yours that are the resident herd that's right here, but as far as pulling the masses and getting your neighbor to call you during hunting season and say, hey man, where's all the deer at? We're not seeing any deer. The reason that we're planting these food plots is to concentrate deer, to be able to hunt these deer more effectively, to keep them on our land during daylight hours, keep them from going off. Definitely there's a side of it where we're trying to feed the whitetails in the wintertime and things like that, but the biggest majority of us are planting these food plots to hunt over, to get an advantage over the neighboring properties and hold whitetails on our farms for longer periods of time. But if we've already got 3 patches of clover all the way around, and we add a 4th, in my opinion, we haven't done anything. Now, if you're in a big wooded area, or let's say you're not, and let's just say you're in a type of an overgrown kind of mixed fields and woods like what I'm in, and nobody food plots around you. Well, a clover and cereal grains, that may be the absolute ticket for you to get your target buck on the ground every year. If you don't have any competition around you, then we're in real good shape on that. If we have a lot of competition, I like to try plots that the competition doesn't have. And what I'm considering the most preferred food sources in that area that are typically a little bit more management intensive, the corns, the soybeans, the alfalfas, things that the neighbors don't have. And maybe they don't know how to raise them, so we're putting these on the farms. Through that, we're holding a lot more deer consistently on these farms. As I was getting ready to make this video, I was kind of thinking of my numbers as far as percentages, and most years I have between 11 and 13 farms. Sometimes that changes a little bit with, a farm maybe sold or something like that, or we might pick one up, but between 11 and 13 farms over across the 1,800 acres. And I was thinking about this, about how many guys food plot around me that I'm aware of. That's obviously not to say there might not be a food plot 800 yards back in there that I have no idea about, but the ones that I'm aware of, out of those 11 to 13 farms, there's four adjoining landowners plant food plots. Out of the four, one plants what I consider the most preferred food sources: the alfalfas, the corn, the standing beans, brassicas, things like that. And they definitely have that mixture of clover and cereal grains as well. They're planting a lot more variety of food plots than what most folks are planting, but only one of my adjoining landowners has that program in place. I'm assuming we can replicate that across the U.S., that many of you might have neighbors that are planting clover or cereal grains. Some of you may not have any competition around you. A couple of you might have one of those guys like I do that can plant it all: corn, soybeans, alfalfa, brassica, cereal grains, the whole 9 yards. But very few people do that. Very few people take their management to that level to be able to try to provide for those whitetails year round and make them need nothing. So food is the first thing that I'm looking at when I'm looking at a property. Food is something that we can change drastically, and we can see results like that. We can take this farm here with no food plot on it, and we can put 2 or 3 acres of standing corn, standing beans, mix in some brassica, cereal grains, some annual clovers in the fall, and all of a sudden we put a tremendous food source on this farm for fall. When whitetails are needing that nutrition, we're providing. So during the hunting season, they're more likely to stay on this farm rather than go over yonder. But there's many other options that we're looking at as far as being different than the neighboring farms. So in my area, cover is very thin. We don't have a ton of it. There's a thicket right here behind me. There are very few of these left in my neck of the woods. What has basically happened is everybody is pretty much managing, or not really managing, but they are letting their forest grow to maximum years to where they can have a timber harvest. For me, something that I could change that would affect the whitetails using this farm would be some form of TSI, a thinning cut, to be able to get more sunlight on the ground to make this thicker. If I thicken this farm up right here, it would be one of the only ones within, I would say, a square mile that would have a really good thicket, the entire wooded section. If we cut all this, it'd be around 50 acres. We would have 50 acres of thick regeneration, quality bedding, quality cover, where whitetails feel comfortable when none of the surrounding properties had that. So that's something that we can look at, and we could add some food here as well. Man, what a difference that would make. Over here, no food. Here, food. Over there, very little cover. Over here, tons and tons of cover. We can pull it onto our property by doing simple management tasks like this and finding out what is lacking in that area and fill the voids. Now, I know a lot of folks like to plant oak trees. Here in my neck of the woods, that's not something that I'm going to recommend. Here's the reason why. In my woods, we're probably 70% oak. The rest remaining being hackberry, maple, hickory, various other, a little bit of walnut around, various other types of timber, but mainly we're 70% oak. So if I went into this farm and planted a bunch of oak trees, I'm not diversifying. That's not something that's going to make this farm stand out. Now, if you're in an area where there's not hardly any oaks, well then sure, absolutely. That's making your farm stand out in that area. Around here, I know a lot of folks really like hunting around persimmon trees. Deer really like persimmons. Here's the issue that we have with persimmons around here. They're everywhere. If I was to walk you around the edge of this field, guarantee you we would find 20, 25. We have a huge stand of persimmon trees. So if I came over here and I planted 6, 8, or a dozen persimmons right here by my stand, Have I done a whole lot of good? Not particularly, because that's not something that's in short supply. That is something that is pretty well plentiful around here. That's not something that is changing from farm to farm. That farm over there is going to have persimmons just like this farm does right here. It's not something that's changing a whole lot. Now, on the flip side of that, there is no apple trees in my neck of the woods, period. No apple trees, no pear trees, no chestnut trees. Now, all of a sudden, there's 3 right there that we could put on this farm that is going to make it different than all the surrounding properties. That's what I'm all about doing, is changing these farms and making these deer make this their preferred area. We want quality cover, we want quality food, and then we want food that nobody else has. And if we can do those few things, we're gonna have the 50-acre farm that's killing mature deer. They're gonna have the 200-acre farm, and they're gonna be trying to figure out where all the deer are at. But there's lots of different things that we can do to make our property stand out from the adjoining landowners. So when we make those changes, we have to be prepared for a large herd coming onto our property. When we start making this farm different than all the neighboring properties, we're gonna have a larger deer herd. When we get into that, we're gonna get into more problems with our access, bumping deer in and out of the woods as we're going in. So all these things have to be thought about before these changes get made. Security is what big mature bucks want. Oh, those deer are just blowing. It's not that big a deal. They don't worry too much about me. And maybe they don't. Maybe those does don't. Maybe those 1.5-year-old bucks that don't know any better don't. But when a 3, 4, 5-year-old deer is getting bumped consistently as you're coming in and out, he's fixing to avoid this farm like the plague. So that's a very big part of this process, is having those key features that makes your farm different from all the surrounding farms, but yet hunting in a way that the whitetails feel secure in here. They don't feel like they're being pressured. We're hunting the edges of these properties, catching them as they're coming and going. We're not going deep on these properties and bumping all kinds of deer out on the way in and out. We can't do that and have good chances at killing mature bucks. If you need help setting up your farm to reach their full potential, or if you need help with your food plots, I have a website set up, www.diyfoodplotpro.com. We have a monthly membership, a yearly membership, and we also have a boots on the ground visit. You can sign up for these. You can ask me any question that you would like, and I will personally answer that to the best of my ability, try to help you with those food plots, try to have more successful plots where we can have better hunting success this fall. If that is something that interests you, go to www.diyfoodplotpro.com. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it.